Greetings. I wanted to give you a little bit of feedback on your first exam. You guys did a pretty great job. I'm really impressed by the very high scores. For those of you who didn't get the score you wanted, I just want to encourage you that typically the first exam is the lowest, so don't panic and don't be too hard on yourselves. You will notice that your final score isn't your original score, and that's because I kind of go through and look at, what did we cover in class, what did we cover well, make some tweaks, make some changes for the next exam. So don't be alarmed by that. That's a good thing. It's always in your favor. So a couple of things that you guys did a great job with was the regions, the 4 regions. I felt like you kind of knew some of the ins and outs of it, and I didn't try to trick you or anything. I mean, I felt like I asked questions that you should generally have an understanding of. I think the one exception wasn't necessarily a regions question as much as it was a general thinking through what it means to be a part of a government. There was a question about backwoods. Now remember, backwoods people would be way on the outskirts. And I think the answer options, I made sure that they were definitely going to weed through the students who knew versus the students who really didn't have a good understanding, because I think it said things like people in the backwoods. So think Nathaniel Bacon's Rebellion, those kinds of people living, a little bit farther away from the governor. There wasn't going to be a lot of government because they're just so far away. There were going to be lots of difficulties with Native Americans, as we saw. So that was probably the one area that worried me a little bit. You guys did a great job in generalities with slavery, generalities with African Americans and Native Americans. I was really pleasantly surprised at how well you did with talking or thinking through colonial government. That's usually a tough question. Most of you nailed it. So some areas that were a little bit difficult, England's pattern of settlement. Remember that, yes, we studied the 4 regions, but remember that was a group of people who said, I want a charter, I want to go land wherever it is they'll give me land, and that's where they ended up. It's not like the Crown had this great big master plan and they for sure wanted the Puritans here and they for sure wanted the slaves here. It didn't work out quite that way. So let's see, colonial interaction, I want to talk about that. The Great Wagon Road was, one of the earliest and first attempts at intercolonial trade. Awesome step toward, later unity that we know has to come. But just keep in mind that these were just traders going through town to get to the other places to sell their goods. It wasn't a powerful force that created dependency. We're not there yet. They're not going to depend on each other. So that was the very beginnings of some sort of unity between colonies that didn't even really like each other. So we're not ready to say that they're unified politically and economically yet. So that was a little bit tricky. Let's see, Salem witch trials. Just remember that it was a Puritan culture, so they were highly religious, but I wouldn't call it an occult, okay? So I think we had a little bit of difficulty there. With religion, which of the colonies were most religious? So, Maryland was devoutly Catholic. Let's see, we had the Puritans, we had the Quakers. Virginia would be the one that's least religious. And yes, they generally followed the Church of England's pattern, but remember that they had lots and lots of double standards. Remember they, wouldn't allow divorce at all because they weren't willing to see people as, people loved by God. They just followed the rules as opposed to following the moral codes, if that makes sense. Albany Plan, that was one more area where some of us struggled a little bit. And remember, it didn't work out because the colonies just weren't ready to work together yet. They weren't ready to give up their own powers for others. They weren't going to let somebody else take over something they were already doing. So it was, and when you look through the options, it kind of used a high-dollar word, but fiscal jealousies. They just didn't want other people doing their things and messing with their system and, getting ahead and those sorts of things. So anyway, just a couple things that I wanted you to be aware of. Good luck on this next week. I hope you really enjoy our studies of the Revolution.